Hello, this is WD.
FM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. We're your hosts, Bri Bertolacini, Marketing Manager.
And Chris Mullen, Senior Marketing and Communications Coordinator at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
Saludos Amigos, a fond greeting to you, Chris. I am very excited for today's episode where we take a closer look at Walt's 1941 South America Goodwill Tour and the resulting films Saludos Amigos and the Three Caballeros.
In 1940, as part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy, the Office of the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, or OCIAA, began asking prominent members of Hollywood to visit South America and to consider infusing Latin American themes into their films. During this time, World War II was raging through Europe. The U.S. was not yet involved in the war, but it would be by early December of the following year, when the attack on Pearl Harbor catalyzed the U.S. to join the Allied forces.
So the Good Neighbor policy was developed to generate international goodwill between the Americas. Many previous goodwill attempts had fallen flat or caused kind of the opposite intended effect. By the spring of 1941, South American countries had been expressing indignation over U.S. ambassadors' kind of half-hearted attempts at garnering favor. It was the idea of John Hay, or Jock Whitney, director of the Motion Picture Division of OCIAA, and multimillionaire oil heir Nelson Rockefeller to call upon Walt Disney for his help. Whitney argued that their efforts could be furthered by Walt Disney and his artists demonstrating the artistic side of the U.S. entertainment and culture. Here's Walt with journalist Pete Martin discussing the tour.
Well, the government came to me about that time. They wanted me to go to South America. It was to build up our relationship down there. And they wanted me to go down kind of representing the cultural side. Nelson Rockefeller's group, through Jock Whitney, under the State Department, the coordinator of Inter-American Affairs. They wanted me to just go on a tour. I said, no, I'm no good at that. I said, I can't do that. They said, well, just go down, you meet people. I said, no, I won't do it. So then they came back and they said, well, will you go down and make some pictures about them? I said, will you go down and see if you can find something that you can make about those countries? I said, we're basically interested in what we call the ABC countries. You see? Argentina, Brazil, Chile. I said, well, yes, I'd like to do that. I said, that could be stimulating. I think we could get something interesting out of that. I said, I'd feel better about going down and really doing something instead of going down and shaking a hand. So then they wanted me to do it. Well, I was right in the hands of the bank. So they had to go and talk to us over the bank. The bank said, well, how do we know if Walt can make anything about South America? How do we know that they just turn out to be propaganda things and wouldn't be worth a darn in the theater? So the government says, well, this was through Jock Whitney, and then we said, we'll gamble on Walt. And they wanted me to make at least 4, and if I could make one about Peru, they'd like it. So that was all set. So I picked up with 18 of my artists. I brought a representative group, cartoonists, storymen, musicians.
This was not only a gamble of an opportunity, but was a difficult time for Walt and the company. Walt's mother, Flora, passed away in 1938. Revenues made by his films that were screening across Europe were not able to leave international markets due to the war. The strike was happening. He had a self-proclaimed, quote, case of the DDs, disillusionment and discouragement. The government promised to underwrite the novel trip, adding further incentive for the studio to participate.
He carefully handpicked the group of artists who went on the trip. Disney legend Norm, known as Ferguson, recognized as a key personality animator, joined the trip as a producer-director. Fergie would collaborate with Disney legend Frank Thomas on the animation. Webb Smith, Ted Sears, and Disney legend Bill Cottrell handled story development. Jim Berdrero and married couple Lee Blair and Disney legend Mary Blair helped conceive the characters. Jack Miller served as a story sketch artist. Charles Wolcott oversaw the music, recording, auditioning, and cataloging, and pulled together the local musical traditions. Disney legend Herb Ryman drew and painted studies of landscapes, buildings, and people they met along the way. Disney legend Larry Landsberg was an assistant director on the trip and one of the 16mm cameramen shooting footage of their travels. Walt and Lee Blair were also additional cameramen on the trip. Jack Cutting advised on the international language versions. Janet Martin, Larry Landsberg's wife, was the unit's publicist, and John Rose was the group's business manager, who coordinated the group's schedule. Martin and Rose were both involved and documented the daily details of the trip. Walt's wife, Lillian, and Bill Cottrell's wife, Hazel, Lillian's sister and former supervisor of Disney's ink and paint department, accompanied the group. El Grupo, a nickname for the group coined by the hotel bellhops, left Los Angeles on August 11, 1941, by airplane. They flew across the country on a DC-3, which stopped for press conferences in Fort Worth, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, and Jacksonville, Florida. The cross-country trip from Los Angeles to Miami took 24 hours. In today's time, it usually only takes about 5 hours. The group stopped overnight at a hotel and then flew across the Caribbean in a Pan-American Stratocruiser.
I can't personally imagine going across the country and it taking 24 hours by air.
And you're not even all the way there yet. That was just getting to Miami.
Also, I feel like, stopping for press conferences along the way is one thing, but with the smaller planes having to make multiple stops,
Well, that's why they had to make multiple stops. Made use of it.
I won't even go on a plane with 2 stops, let alone, 3 stops, all taking place over a period of 24 hours. It seems like too much, but that's what they had to do to change the world.
Exactly. They were on a mission. They were there to serve a purpose for the American government. So props to them. They have more strength in their travel than I do today.
So they leave the U.S., and their first stop in South America was in Belém, Brazil, located at the mouth of the Amazon. They stayed just one night, and during that time they visited a local zoo. Bill Cottrell remembered, quote, "We landed for refueling in some little place in Brazil, and there were hundreds and hundreds of school children there to greet Walt. They knew who Walt Disney was." Their next stop was Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where they stayed for 10 days. There, they visited farms, zoos, schools, art clubs, and festivals.
As we heard Walt say, work on gathering material for films began almost immediately. While researching, it didn't take long for the team to discover just how large a part of local culture the Brazilian parrot is. Several of the artists focused on studying the bird by way of local zoos and museums. Creating a character based on the papagayo was an obvious yet wise decision. Jose Carioca would become Donald Duck's co-star for the feature Saludos Amigos.
Their next stop was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where they spent an entire month. During their time in Argentina, they studied dance and music. A troupe under the direction of musicologist and composer Andres Chazarreta, an authority on Argentine music and dances, performed authentic folk dances. Walt and El Grupo loved it, noting that it combined both instruction and entertainment. After Buenos Aires, El Grupo split up into 4 smaller groups, each one setting off to explore a new location within South America. In addition to other regions of Argentina, other destinations included Bolivia and Peru. More material was gathered, and by September 29th, most of El Grupo reunited in Santiago, Chile. The flight to Chile would later be depicted in the Saludos Amigos segment Pedro, about a baby mail plane.
On October 4th, the group boarded the TES Santa Clara, beginning their long voyage home. Herb Ryman, Jack Miller, and Lee and Mary Blair stayed behind and continued their trip by visiting Bolivia, Peru, and Mexico. On the boat trip back, the team that traveled with Walt gathered the sketches, paintings, and music into storyboards on the boat's deck and began to sketch out the first film of the trip to be released, Saludos Amigos. The party arrived in New York City in time for the premiere of Dumbo at the Broadway Theater on October 23, 1941. After the premiere, the Disneys flew back to Los Angeles to reunite with their daughters, whom they had been away from for 12 weeks. Here's Diane talking about her memories of this time.
The South American trip made a big impression on both Sharon and me. She was very little, but I was 41, wasn't it? So I would have been 8 years old at the end of that year. It was my 8th year. They were gone for 3 months, and they didn't come home until it was almost Christmas time, actually. Now that I realize, and because they went to New York for the premiere of Dumbo, that happened, and then Pearl Harbor. They were home for Pearl Harbor because that was the 7th, and I remember when it happened. They're welcoming home. It wasn't a Christmas gift, but I got this wonderful doll. I learned later it's a Lenchi Carmen Miranda doll. It was about as big as I was, and the doll's in our museum. It's a little worse for wear because it was in storage for a long time. Mm-hmm. And a Bahiana doll for Sharon. And both dolls are in the museum in the South of the Borders exhibit.
As Diane noted, you can view the doll she was gifted on display alongside the passport photos of El Grupo and some of Mary Blair's artwork from her time in South America in Gallery 6 of the museum. Unfortunately, Roy had to break the news via telegram that their father, Elias Disney, had passed away. Walt later remarked, quote, "I only wish that Roy and I could have had success sooner so that we could have done more for my mother and father."
Despite initially feeling he would be, quote, no good at being a Goodwill ambassador, Walt fulfilled his commitments, took part in cultural festivities at nearly every turn of the trip, met with government leaders, other government officials and dignitaries, radio personalities, artists, filmmakers, reporters, and more. He was greeted by thousands of children, had countless cameras and microphones pointed at him, and signed hundreds of autographs.
Saludos Amigos had its world premiere in Rio de Janeiro on August 24, 1942, and was released in the U.S. on February 6, 1943. This film was made up of 4 segments tied together by live-action sequences of Walt and his artists on their trip. The animated segments were Lake Titicaca, showcasing Donald's exploration of the Andes Mountains; Pedro, the story of a baby airplane named Pedro who takes over for his father delivering the mail; Aquarela do Brasil, introducing the Brazilian parrot, Jose Carioca, who teaches Donald Duck to dance the samba; and El Gaucho Goofy, the final segment of the film, in which Goofy, dressed as an American cowboy, becomes a gaucho in the Pampas region of Argentina. Here is Walt discussing Saludos Amigos.
I made the pictures. There were 4 of them. I made one on Brazil, one on Argentina, one on Chile, and one on Peru. And when I got them made, a little problem came up. They said, "You've got to put these together somehow." So I didn't know how to put them together, but I had taken 16 millimeter film of our trip, of artists working and different things like that. I took the 16 millimeter film, blew it up to 35, used it as connections between the 4 subjects, and presented it as a tour of my artists around. And it all went as a package. And we called it Saludos Amigos. And instead of it being a Goodwill tour for the United States, it ended to be a darn Goodwill tour for Disney.
Three Caballeros had its world premiere in Mexico City on December 21st, 1944, and its U.S. premiere on February 3rd, 1945. Similarly to Saludos Amigos, it featured 4 Latin American-themed segments. It centers around Donald Duck receiving birthday presents from his Latin American amigos. One of the gifts is a book that features Donald's pal, Jose Carioca, who invites him to step with him into the pages for a visit to Bahia. In this segment, Donald and Jose meet actress Aurora Miranda, and she dances with Donald. The next gift is from Mexico. That brings another friend, Panchito, the Mexican Charles Rooster, who presents Donald with a piñata as the very spirit of Christmas and shares with him the tradition of Las Posadas. After they explore the story of Las Posadas, Donald breaks the piñata to reveal all the toys and gifts within. One of the gifts in the piñata is a scrapbook that introduces a visit to Mexico.
The film intersperses live-action dancing and Latin American songs. This film marked the first time that Walt had attempted incorporating live-action characters in an animated scene since the Alice comedies in the 1920s. The new and improved process of combining animation and live-action was developed by Walt's longtime colleague and collaborator, Disney Legend Iworks. UB developed the 2-head aerial optical printer to seamlessly place Aurora Miranda in the same environment as Donald. This concept would go on to be used in Darby O'Gill and the Little People, The Parent Trap, Mary Poppins, and many more.
Now it is time for our fun and fancy facts segment. First up, parts of the Three Caballeros were later released separately as shorts for an educational film, Creative Film Adventures #1, in 1976. This film used segments from The Three Caballeros, Mars and Beyond, a 1957 episode of the Disneyland television show, and One Day on Beetle Rock, a 1967 episode of Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, to inspire students to utilize writing to express their feelings.
The three happy chappies with snappy serappies continue to entertain audiences today, appearing in Disney theme parks, resorts, and television shows. Notably, Epcot is home to the Grand Fiesta Tour starring the Three Caballeros attraction, which opened in 2007 in the Mexico Pavilion. They also appear in the Disneyland and Hong Kong Disneyland It's a Small World attractions. The Three Caballeros made guest appearances on episodes of House of Mouse, Mickey and the Roadster Racers, and the 2017 DuckTales reboot prior to landing their own show, The Legend of the Three Caballeros, which can be streamed on Disney+.
Both Saludos Amigos and The Three Caballeros were Academy Award-nominated films. The first film was nominated for Best Sound and Best Scoring of a Motion Picture, while the titular song was nominated for Best Song. The Three Caballeros was also nominated for Best Sound and Best Scoring of a Musical Picture.
Saludos Amigos was the first Disney animated feature film to premiere initially outside of the United States.
The documentary film, Walt and El Grupo, premiered at the San Francisco International Film Festival on April 26, 2008, followed by a limited release in Los Angeles, New York City, and Anaheim, beginning September 11, 2009. Then was released on DVD in 2010. The film was directed by Theodore, also goes by Ted, Thomas, son of Frank Thomas, who was one of the El Grupo animators that accompanied Walt on the trip. The film features rare 16mm Kodachrome footage intended as reference material for the trip and illustrates the impact the trip had on American and global culture. You can also see this film on Disney+.
Mary Blair developed her iconic style on the South America trip. Mary was first hired at the Walt Disney Studios in 1940 to develop concept art, but due to her interest in pursuing illustration, she left during the summer of 1941. 2 months later, Mary and her husband Lee Blair were invited to join Walt on the South America Goodwill Tour. It was on this trip that she famously had an artistic awakening, inspired by the colors, art, sights, and sounds of South America that remained with her for the rest of her career. Walt's daughter and museum co-founder, Diane Disney Miller, once shared with filmmaker Don Hahn her father's opinion of Mary's transformation while in South America.
I think it was on that trip to South America that Mary Blair's art first really caught Dad's attention, because I think, and I hear that everybody feels that Mary Blair, she was quite a part of the California watercolor school, but she really burst forth on her own on that trip. Her watercolors, the art she did down there, just the color palette just really amazed Dad. He used to say, I think she's colorblind because she has this strange way of putting colors together. But it was just she had this color sense. First time I've seen pink and orange used together, very effectively and, courageously. I think from that point on, she was always a very important figure. We were very aware of Mary and very impressed with her, Sharon and I.
And with that brings us to the end of this very special episode. We hope you enjoyed taking this international journey with us. No passport required.
Thanks for tuning in to WDFM, the official Walt Disney Family Museum podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Email us questions or comments at podcast@wdfmuseum.org.
Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at WDF Museum for all the latest updates.
We sing and we samba, we shout ay caramba, and we keep moving forward. Bye.
Bye. Adios.
Adios.